What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Rehumanisation Station. This is your host, Christopher Jones, aka Dr. X. This station stems from my Flippin and Vibin brand, where I focus on extending awareness around rehumanizing research and work in society, education, and sport. The rehumanization in particular encompasses two platforms. That is through one, the Collaborative Practice Series, where I'll be interviewing and engaging with scholars, community activists, students, and researchers to unpack the rehumanizing work they do to transform the self and those around them. The second series is titled It's Ball Life, where I'll be interviewing athletes, coaches, trainers, and directors of sport on how they are utilizing their platforms for athletes within and outside of athletic spaces. As a former professional athlete, navigating a career outside of basketball was difficult, and further engagement needs to commence around developing alternative avenues for athletes in sport. Thank you for joining me in the Rehumanization Station. I'm excited today for our very first episode of the Rehumanization Station. This is just about me, my background, my lived experiences, and where this brain comes from, right? And what I've been through as an athlete and a postgraduate researcher, and where I see this going, right? So I'm going to be asking myself questions, and I'm going to be answering them. So Dr. X, tell us a bit about yourself and your background. So I want to talk first about my lived experience. So my background, I was an extremely shy, observant, and caring young person from a middle-class, predominantly white background in Houston, Texas, with 4 siblings. My parents came out of East Chicago, Indiana, a community that is structured to breed violence and less opportunities for people who look like me. Thus, when my parents moved to Houston, they have been keen on supporting extended family. And growing up, we had an average of 8 to 10 people living in one household, whether that was a cousin, god brothers or sisters, or our big mama. Despite growing up in an economically privileged environment, I somehow was on reduced fee school meals majority of my high school career. Also, while my peers argued about who had a nicer car, we were thankful enough to even have a car, even if it needed a jump start every now and then going to and from school. Education was important, but not a main priority. As a pupil and teenager, I had below or average academic attainment. I took quote unquote remedial, aka special classes, because I did so bad on racist placement tests every year. So for example, you had writing and reading comprehension were my worst subjects. I did so bad on my SATs, I had to retake them. Also, my identical twin was no help, as he was right there with me struggling. And so my black reality in academic spaces commenced early on, but was cemented in my consciousness when I was only 11 years old in the 6th grade. So for instance, I always knew I was black. Our parents always told us the rhetoric, you got to work twice as hard to achieve compared to your white peers in life. But I always knew I was black, but I didn't realize I was, excuse my language, a nigga until I was 11 years old, when throughout the entire year we had a racist student in our 6th grade class, in our PE class, and he would always use the N-word. And we tried to tell the coaches the entire year to try to put a stop to it, and they never really did do anything about it. Obviously, our coaches were put out all white. And one day, one of my friends had enough of it, and things got violent. He punched him. I pushed him. Other people got involved, and then people told on us, and then I ended up going to the assistant principal. And I remember like this was yesterday. I'd never been to the principal because I never really got in trouble when I was in school. I was a good, as far as I was one of those perfect attendants. Didn't really get a detention that much unless I was like late to class or something like that. But I'll never forget her face. She looked at me like I was the worst person in the world. And on my report, it said shoved another student for calling him the N-word. And I realized from that point on, there was no empathy, no sympathy towards me. Remember, I was 11 years old. And that's when I realized that I was going to be on my own, or just with my black peers within educational spaces. Now, as a scholarship athlete, fortunately, we were a basketball family, and that was my main priority in education. Probably because the curriculum didn't interest me. All my teachers were white, so they were either too nice or racist, and basketball would provide me a free education. This first led me to Panola Junior College in a small country down in Carthage, Texas for 2 years. My last 2 years brought me to an HBCU, Prairie View A&M University, where the first time in an academic space I was, 1, part of the majority, 2, saw myself in the curriculum, and 3, being taught by black professors for the first time. I never had a black teacher my entire life. Ironically, this was when I had the best grades as well. I played professionally also after this, coming out of college in different European countries. So my first stop was Previtsa, Slovakia. So it was a nice culture shock, probably being the only black people in the entire city where nobody really spoke English. Even during games, my teammates at one point had to translate to me what the coach was saying during timeouts and huddles. But this was a fun experience, and it had its ups and downs because I had to leave because I pulled my groin, but I was able to come back and finish for the playoffs. But then my second stop was Germany. So I played in Pro B, which was a great opportunity as well. But after these two stops, I thought I was done with ball due to aging complications and just being sick of the process and not being valued in certain instances, in my opinion. However, I had a life-changing opportunity presented to me, and shout out to Drew Lasker for this. I came to Durham, England, to play professionally in 2015 in the BBL League, British Basketball League, and my contract was a full postgraduate scholarship to earn a master's degree. So I was playing professionally while doing a master's degree and playing for the university team. Yes, y'all, if you come to England or certain spaces in Europe, you can do a master's degree and play basketball. So after my first year in England, I came to realize I'm more than an athlete, while simultaneously asking myself, is ball life? So Dr. X, how did you navigate your postgraduate experience? Yeah, once I realized this, but during my master's degree, so I did 2 masters. I was fortunate enough to do 2 masters, and while I was doing that in England, my brother was able to come out with me as well. My younger brother, he played with me. He did a master's degree as well, and that was a great experience. But then once I was done, I did my second master's in criminology and criminal justice, which was my undergraduate degree. I did a dissertation on the black experiences and black perceptions towards the police. And I'm pretty sure y'all know how that went, so I don't really need to get into the analysis when it comes to that. But yeah, I went home and I had to figure out what I was going to do. Stick with to find a job, so I just had an odd job. I was working security overnight. Yeah, and I'm sitting with a degree, 2 masters, and I'm just working as a security guard overnight, making minimum wage, right? And I'm just reading books on the black experience and just rehumanizing. And I was fortunate enough to think about it, and I was offered to do a PhD back in Durham. Well, actually, I had to make that decision myself, but I created a proposal. After a few tries, I was able to find somebody, Vicky Bolivar, who was very important to me. She took a chance on me when no one else did. So within my PhD, I wanted to look at the black and white student experience. So it was about trying to research my lived experiences and how that was in England, right? So within the PhD, once I started in 2019, I believe, or 2018, navigating an academic space as a person who was a black researcher and athlete was challenging at first, but I got through it. But I would say Durham University is a predominantly white university. It's one of the Russell groups out here in England of people who are American listening. I would say it's equivalent to an Ivy League school. It's always usually in the top 5 after Oxford and Cambridge here in England. And that's where I was at. So it was a predominantly white environment. I was the only black person in my entire department. So I was in sociology. And my first year, I had quite a few racialized interpersonal experiences. So it was this fear of being in a new space due to this lack of self-efficacy and peer experiences. So for instance, I remember one time I was in a break room just chilling, about to make some tea. And then a student came next to me because there's actually a seminar room, a classroom at the time in the sociology department that was right next to the break room. And the break room was for postgraduate researchers and staff. And this white female came up to me and said, this is for PGRs and staff, right? And I was like, yes, I know. And she was like, okay. So again, that's like a racialized experience. What does a researcher look like, right? In her eyes, right? So she thought she was probably helping me out, but in reality, it actually made me feel some type of way. Obviously, that's what we call a racial microaggression, right? And also, even within the peers, I was experiencing racial microaggression. So for instance, when I was introducing myself to other PhD students, I would, it's the normal, when you talk to people, hey, what do you study, etc. I would ask them what they study, and then they don't even ask me what I would study. They would just insinuate or assume that I was doing sociology or some type of sport research when I wasn't. I was doing the black and white experience in education. So again, it's is this imaginary towards black people that people have in society, right? So like I said, I'm even in these spaces that are supposed to be inclusive, and there's still this exclusiveness within that, right? And I'm just like I said, I love everyone I was around. Obviously, this was something that happened on a couple of occasions, and I didn't let it define me. I didn't let those types of experiences stop me from doing what I needed to do, and but even within that, like I said, if you think about my lived experience, I mentioned before, I wasn't really involved in school like that. Like I said, I was in special classes, and then when I was in these spaces, I was really insecure, like especially with language, academic language. I was like, what are these people saying? We had like seminar meetings every week to listen to someone do their a presentation or research, and I would have a notebook, and I couldn't even really follow the content because I was too busy trying to write down the words that they were saying and Googling it later on to understand what certain words were, right? So it was a challenge, but I'm very competitive. People know me, I'm competitive, and obviously there's ups and downs within that, but then it just made me stronger. I started to understand that this was going to take some work, and I put all my work and effort into it while doing a PhD, right? So during that time, while playing basketball, so I was doing a PhD and playing basketball, and at times teaching. So I was working 2 to 3 jobs simultaneously within my 3-year PhD, right? So even to this day, when I teach, students mistake me for a student, another student, right? Even when I walk in a classroom, sometimes they assume that I'm a student and not necessarily the ones who's going to be teaching them. I mean, that's just what it is. People try to say black don't crack, but it goes back to, like I said about the imaginary. What does a researcher look like, And but during this whole process, right, I had to think about what was best for me, right? And what was best for me was to continue going, put the effort in. So when athletics was my entire life, right? And I used academia was probably like 5% of my life. So it transformed to academia being, I would say 80%, while sport was more 20%. Obviously I was involved. I had to do certain things because I was committed to my scholarship, won a lot of games, but ultimately my main goal was to try to figure out what I could do after that, right? And that is something that we're not taught as athletes as much, and there needs to be more spaces where people can kind of share their lived experiences, and so there could be more opportunities for athletes after they're done, right? Now that goes back to the question. Is going to be a series on my podcast asking athletes, coaches, trainers questions. Is ball really life, right? You can't play sports forever, but that's something to think about, right? So while I was doing my actual research, my topic on race, racism, and racial inclusiveness, I realized that how can I uniquely contribute to my field? So Dr. X, how did you come up with the Flippin the Script framework and the Flippin and Vibin brand? Like I said, my field was sociology of education. Right? And I looked at my theory that I used. I looked at critical race theory. I don't know if people watch the news or follow that type of stuff, but critical race theory is a way to analyze, deconstruct, and challenge racial inequity in society and education. Now, critical race theory has had a lot of pushback from the right, deeming it racist, teaching kids to hate themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But we can get all into that later down the line, right? But that's pretty much what critical race theory is. And that's what I use. And I started to realize that within critical race research, there's a lot of this regurgitating knowledge, more victim narratives, more individualized narratives, rather than trying to tackle the structure, which is what critical race theory is supposed to do. Right. So I had to realize this famous saying, what Professor Small says, when we know our history, we erase the mystery. Right. History repeats itself in multifaceted ways in the context of racism. Racism is a war, and each generation has its battles, so we must learn our history to develop strategies to confront this war, right? I understood the best way forward was to acknowledge our ancestors' contributions, was to remove epistemic injustice and rehumanize. I realized the most conscious scholars were the ones who loved themselves, people, and Black African history. They spoke with such humility, passion, and never took sides, right? One of my favorite Malcolm X quotes stating, "I have more respect for a person who lets me know where they stand, even if they're wrong, than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil." Therefore, it's important to realize that nobody is perfect, even some of our most conscious scholars and athletes. We have all been targeted by this dehumanizing culture we reside in to be perpetrators at one point in time, which led me to my main contribution to knowledge and underpins this entire brand, right? So my main contribution to knowledge was my Flippin the Script framework, right? So while researching race, racism, and racial inclusivity, I realized we needed something to empower both perpetrators and targets, aka victims of racism. This led me to the Flippin the Script being born. Right. And Flippin the Script is, people understand this term as a way to unexpectedly reverse a situation and deviate from the norm. Practice healthy altruism for the purposes of rehumanization of self and the community. I will repeat, my definition of love is the will to preach and practice healthy altruism for the purposes of rehumanization of self and the community. All right, so self-care is crucial to loving thyself. Right, and once I've completed my PhD, I have to always remember everyone's journey is different, right? So there's different journeys for different types of athletes, academics, activists, anybody willing to do this type of work to change the narrative, traditional narratives, right? Even I was assistant principal last year for the Rainbow College, right? I used to be homophobic, and now I was working at a Rainbow College, right? It's important to understand these things, but it's also important to understand that in academic society and sports world, we must ask ourselves, why are we here? There's a lot of individualism going on. So, for instance, are you only seeking research grants and publications, or would you like to rehumanize self with the community? Are you just trying to make money as a fake basketball trainer and not giving kids the authentic tools to become better athletes and human beings? I've come to realize there's this unhealthy competition underpinned by inauthenticity and disrespect, especially amongst people who are Black who feel forced to compete for limited capital in the academic terrain while predominantly viewing sport as the only way for economic or career progression. Ultimately, we shouldn't be in this space for first place clout, but if we are, which many of us do, play the game that way, allow those who do express, healthy competition and authenticity through practicing and preaching communalism and to lead, right? So Flippin the Script empowers perpetrators, and I didn't think people were ready for that, which resulted in a form of isolation for me. However, this type of thinking limits my capacity to fully embrace my research, And I have come to realize I am not the future, I am now. All right. So once we understand to love ourselves, that we can love others and develop an academic family, a sports family, and most importantly, a communal family. Right. Then we come to realize we are now. Right. Repeat after me. We are now. We are now. It is our responsibility to educate and learn from the next generation. Be powerful. We speak about knowledge as power, but knowledge is only semi-power, y'all. Wisdom is power, because wisdom is knowledge plus lived experiences leading to good judgment. So to conclude, my lived experiences has shown me as long as equity, diversity, inclusion, and honesty are underpinned by love, then we will come to understand the universe is limitless. If you've made it this far into this introduction, thank you. You're a real one. Please join me on this journey where my brand will be Flippin and Vibin to rehumanize through 3 strands. That's 1, the Rehumanisation Station, which is my podcast series hosting people involved in academia, community, and sport. 2, my Flip and Vibe blog. And 3, my Google Classroom courses for everyone that will commence in the summertime. It's course content where parents can learn with kids and teens and adults can learn different types of West African history, history and society, race and racism, and other forms of subordination, right? And different types of, depending on your sport, training for your sport, right? Like I said, I want this brand to expand. It's going to be huge. I'm excited about it. And again, thank you for joining me in this. And please, if you want to be involved, just let me know. And let's rehumanize, fam. Thank you.